Hey everybody, so I just want to talk a little bit about test cutting and specifically like using the fingers during the test cut. Now what you see in HEMA a lot of the times is the cuts are really exaggerated. People will plant, stand in distance, do a big wind up after they've stepped in distance, and then cut down with a lot of like body rotation, weird wrist mechanics, and they're not really cutting successfully half the time. So I already did a video on longsword. I might even post it at the end of this with some of the cuts, but the basic principle that I find, and it's supported by a lot of historical evidence as well as living traditions that teach cutting and parts of the world where you can still unfortunately see some of that use today, which continues, is the use of the fingers in cutting. So a good example of that is like the 1796 manual of Le Marchand, and what he shows is the fingers loose like this, right, in a cutting position, sometimes with the sword even tilted back, and then what you do is you squeeze it forward like that, and it can stop here if you want it to, or it can stop a little bit farther in into a handshake grip. Either one of those positions is totally fine, but the basic idea is that's the action that accelerates the cut. So it's also paired with, you know, a little bit of body motion, sometimes a lunge, which adds a little bit of force, sometimes a step, sometimes a twist afterwards, and an extension of the arm is the main thing. But the key to accelerating things is using the fingers. That adds whip. And the cool thing is that when you test cut pool noodles, you can really see that. So a lot of people who are using these weird, to me weird, and I don't want to criticize anybody or call anybody out, but they're using these mechanics, right? They'll have a real hard time cutting through pool noodles because you actually have to like slice them, and it's too slow. It just kind of like knocks them around, and there's nothing in the center of the pool noodle. It's just empty, right? Just kind of knocks them around. And I have some videos of that too. I'll try to look back and find, but I taught a student how to do that, how to cut them. But the main thing is if you squeeze the fingers, it accelerates the sword a lot faster, so it'll just kind of like whip through the target. And so I'm going to show you how it's done here. So basically I'm just going to like tilt whatever angle I want to. So it's just like if I'm fencing, what I'll do a lot of times is prepare my attack kind of like with the angle that I want, doing it open-eyed, and then decide to commit kind of at the last second. But I've started my arm motion, my extension, so it's not really like a huge arc that the sword travels through. Obviously this works better against different targets, so like neck, face, wrist, everything. You can make really tight arcs, and of course you can do bigger cuts if you want to when the time is right. Most of the time for initial cuts, for like leading cuts, you don't want to do that. If you're doing like a riposte or something big, great opportunity to, or like following a beat or something, but generally you want to keep your cuts as tight as possible. So I'm just going to demonstrate that. So that's a fairly easy to cut target. I did one earlier with the 2-liter pop bottle, and it's true that like when you're doing like Powerade bottles, Gatorade bottles, or if you're trying to cut through a thick tree, you're going to need a little bit more wind up than that. But again, a lot of these target like softer targets, right? So same thing. I'll show the same thing from the other side. On this side, I'm just like really tilting, cutting through, and it's that squeeze of the finger. So my blade here is like horizontal, and then I squeeze it forward. That's what accelerates things. And the recovery is the main difference between medieval kind of sources and the more modern ones. So if I'm doing this with a saber or a broadsword, I have my hand guarded like this. So what I can do is cut through and then immediately come back, and my hand is like keeping me safe. With a medieval sword, probably a lot of times you'd be paired with a buckler potentially, right? And so what you're going to do is cut, and then after that just like relax and allow your sword to like come in like that afterwards. And so you get all these funky like 133 kind of poses through it, and that's just the follow through. It doesn't mean that they're cutting like in huge giant arcs whipping through most of the time. I think a lot of times they would be a little bit tighter, and they're pulling it forward, and then they're just relaxing the sword afterwards, the sword arm. because you can't leave your hand out there unless you've got the buckler, in which case you do see that, right? And then it's the same thing for rising cuts. You just tilt the sword down, squeeze the fingers up like that, and it usually works pretty good. So again, it's just all on the fingers. You don't have to do any weird mechanics with it. Again, you can rotate, you can twist, you can add that afterwards, just kind of like follow through. But the main thing that I think people are not utilizing that's causing them to have lower success rates with cuts is fingers a lot of the time, and that also ends up making sparring a little bit safer. If they're fencing with using their fingers, you can accelerate cuts really fast. They tend not to hit as hard as when you like torque your body into it, but that's actually how you cut with a sword, right? It's you're not using it as a club, you're not torquing everything 100% and bashing the other guy, because there's an awful lot of video footage, experiences in my own life that show that that's not what works when people use it as a baseball bat club, like golf club baseball bat is what I'm trying to say. The edge turns a little bit when they make contact, and so it's way less effective. They're also tending to hurt themselves, whereas using the fingers and stuff like that, it keeps your wrist and arm in pretty good shape, as long as you're not gripping it too tight or using a lot of reps. And this is a heavy sword. This is not a light sword that I'm using. It's not like a 18th century saber. This is actually like a cold steel Viking sword, and they're pretty heavy. Like they feel like the real deal here. A lot of Viking swords, maybe not a lot, but there are Viking sword examples that are like really choppers and pretty heavy, and there's also some really beautiful light ones too. This one's a chopper, right? And I'm using the same mechanics as I would really with a sport saber. The difference is the follow through and protecting the hand.